They were once everywhere. In the markets of Fez, in the stone alleys of Marrakesh, voices singing in Ladino, lighting candles behind shuttered windows. 250,000 Jews lived in Morocco after the war. Today, barely 2,000 remain. Not killed, not exiled by sword, but vanished quietly, almost invisibly, across oceans into silence. And yet, they never truly left, because their DNA stayed behind, like hidden letters stitched into a forgotten code. Not just memories, not just prayers, but molecular footprints, waiting to be read. When scientists opened that genetic code, what they found wasn't Moroccan. It wasn't Berber. It wasn't even North African. It was something else entirely. The genes didn't point south to the Sahara or west to the Atlas Mountains. They whispered east, across deserts, across seas, toward a different memory, a place of temples, of exile, of fire. And that's when the contradiction struck. If these people lived in Morocco for 2,000 years, why do their chromosomes refuse to call it home? Because in their blood, there are no Berber maternal lines, no local roots. Their bodies tell a story the soil does not. As if, beneath every mezuzah carved in Moroccan stone, another voice was speaking. Quiet, ancient, persistent. So who were they really? The people who vanished twice, first from Spain, then from Morocco, but whose genes still refused to forget. And if they weren't truly from here, where did they come from? You'd think 2,000 years would be enough time to belong. Enough time for a family to become the land, for the land to shape their blood, their names, their face in the mirror. But that's not what happened here. Because when researchers cracked open the Y-DNA of Moroccan Jews, the genetic thread passed from father to son. It didn't point to the Atlas Mountains or to Berber tribes. It pointed east, to Babylon, to a land of exile, of scrolls, of empires fallen into dust. Their paternal lineages, even after 2 millennia in North Africa, still trace back to the Middle East, to ancient Judea, to men who once walked temple courtyards and whispered prayers in a tongue now lost to daily speech. And then came the Cohen Code. Hidden inside many of their Y chromosomes was something haunting, the Cohen modal haplotype, a genetic signature older than Roman ruins, older than Islam, older than Morocco itself, a marker carried by the descendants of the Jewish priestly class, the Kohanim. Not metaphor, not myth, a literal, measurable inheritance, passed from father to son, nearly unchanged, for over 3,000 years. Even today, that code binds Moroccan Jews to others across the world, from Iran to Lithuania, from Yemen to Brooklyn. One thread, buried deep, stitching together a people scattered by time. But that's the twist. The men stayed tied to their ancient past. It's the women who whisper a different truth. Because when we follow the maternal line, the empty DNA passed from mother to daughter, the story begins to change. And what it reveals isn't what anyone expected. For 2,000 years, they lived in Morocco, married there, buried there, prayed under the same sun. But when scientists traced the maternal bloodlines of Moroccan Jews, something didn't add up. The mothers, they weren't from Morocco at all. No Berber roots, no African signatures, none of the genetic echoes you'd expect after centuries on this soil. Instead, the trail led north, across the sea, to the hills of Spain, to the coasts of Italy, to the forgotten women of Southern Europe and West Eurasia. And not just one woman, not a single matriarch, passed down through generations. Unlike the Ashkenazim, whose mitochondrial DNA traces to just 4 founder mothers, the Moroccan Jewish maternal map is scattered, fragmented, a mosaic without a centerpiece. Each woman a separate origin, a separate story. Each arrival a thread, not a pattern. Some came fleeing the Inquisition. Some, maybe joined through quiet conversions. Others, their names lost entirely, remembered only in strands of base pairs and mutations. And yet, they entered a world that rarely let outsiders in. A world defined by endogamy, by insularity, by traditions carved in stone and protected like breath in a storm. So, how did these women get in? How did Southern European mothers become the vessels for a Middle Eastern faith on North African soil? Was it love, desperation, survival, or something deeper? A forgotten chapter in the exile story, written by women no one recorded? Because the science is clear. These mothers were not from the desert, not from the mountains, not from the streets their daughters would later walk. They came from elsewhere. And that question, that ache remains. Why were Moroccan Jewish women not Moroccan at all? In 1492, Spain lit a fire, and it didn't burn out. It scattered. The Inquisition chased Jews from their homes with swords and sermons, forced conversions and silence. Entire families, centuries rooted in Andalusia, vanished overnight. But they didn't disappear. They moved west, across the sea, to Morocco. And with them came more than books, names, and prayers. They brought bloodlines. The Megarashim, the exiled, poured into an already ancient Jewish world. Morocco wasn't empty. The Tashavim were there, Jewish communities older than the Roman ruins they walked past. But when the Iberian Jews arrived, something shifted. Something irreversible. Not with war. Not with violence. But with marriage. With memory. With mitochondria. Over time, the old lineages faded. The new ones, from Spain, from Portugal, took root. Deep, fast, dominant. When scientists tested the autosomal DNA, the full genetic picture, the answer was unmissable. Moroccan Jews had more Iberian ancestry than North African. More echoes of Seville than of the Sahara. It wasn't a cultural blend. It was a genetic overwrite. The expulsion didn't end the Jewish story. It rebooted it. These weren't just refugees. They were carriers of a second exile. Their genes fused with the past, reshaping Moroccan Jewry into something new. Something born of survival and silence. But here's the part that doesn't fit. Moroccan Jews have lived side by side with Berber tribes for centuries. Stories tell of Berbers converting, of Jewish tribes hidden in the mountains, of kings with Jewish mothers. So if they lived together, if they prayed beside one another, if the oral histories speak of kinship, then where is the Berber blood? They say history is written by the victors. But what about the stories passed down in whispers? According to Ibn Khaldun, the great North African historian, entire Berber tribes once converted to Judaism. Whole families, whole kingdoms, hidden deep in the mountains of Morocco, where languages twisted and beliefs blurred. It's a haunting thought that in the shadows of the Atlas, there were Berbers who called themselves Jews. And for centuries, that story held, told by elders, carved into oral memory, woven into the fabric of identity. But then the DNA spoke. When scientists searched the blood of Moroccan Jews for Berber markers, for signatures like M1, U6, EM81, the results were almost silent. These weren't just rare. They were nearly absent. It was as if the entire chapter, the Berber conversion, had been erased from the genome. No matrilineal imprint. No genetic memory. The people who were said to once belong had left no trace behind. And yet, science doesn't close the door. It only asks better questions. Because in one test, a sliver of light appeared. A rare mitochondrial signature. U6A1. Carried not by many, just by 2 women. But 2 is enough. Enough to rattle the silence. Enough to raise the dead. Were they daughters of Berber converts? Survivors of a forgotten line? Or outliers, accidental, meaningless? The DNA won't say. But what it proves is this. History and genetics don't always agree. One speaks in stories, the other in sequences. And sometimes they fight. The past insists there were Jewish Berbers. The genome barely nods. But then, just as the trail goes cold, one mutation, small, defiant, ancient, refuses to stay silent. Some stories aren't told through words, but through weakness. In quiet homes across Morocco, children were born with symptoms no one understood. Muscles fading, minds slipping, lives folding inward far too soon. For decades, there were no answers, no names, just silence. Grief passed down like heirlooms. But when scientists finally decoded the DNA of Moroccan Jews, the silence cracked. What they found wasn't just disease. It was memory, locked in the blood, a high carrier rate of Tay, sex, but with mutations no one had ever seen before. Not the Ashkenazi kind. These were different, unique to Morocco, ghosts that never left. Then came PCCA2, a neurological collapse caused by a gene called VPS53. In one study, Nearly 1 in 37 Moroccan Jews was a carrier. That's not rare. That's legacy. These disorders weren't imported. They evolved in isolation, born inside a community that stayed together, married within, guarded its walls. And through those walls, certain mutations slipped in. Quiet, unnoticed. Until generations later, they screamed. Even cystic fibrosis showed its own Moroccan accent, with rare CFTR mutations not seen in the East or Europe. Just here. Just them. Each mutation tells a secret. Of ancestors who survived exile. Of families who stayed close, too close. Of genetic patterns shaped not by nature, but by history. Because this isn't just about health. It's about exile carving itself into the body. A hidden archive, written in base pairs. These aren't accidents. They're biological scars, shaped by endogamy, migration, survival. And if that much was passed on in silence, what else did exile lock away in the blood? In most towns, the further back you go, the more the bloodlines blur. Neighbors marry. Tribes mix. Cultures bend. But not here. Not with Moroccan Jews. When scientists opened their genomes, they found something strange, something tight, dense, repetitive. Fourth cousin DNA. Fifth cousin DNA. Again and again. Across families. Across time. It was like one big extended family, stretched across centuries. This wasn't accident. It was design. A wall had been built, invisible but unbreakable. A wall of tradition, of survival, of ritual. It's called endogamy, marrying within, not just to preserve religion, but to protect identity. And it worked. Their DNA stayed intact, Middle Eastern, Levantine, even after 2,000 years in a land that wasn't their own. But that same wall, that same strategy of survival, left a signature, a pattern, a price. Because when you map them, gene by gene, on a principal component graph, Moroccan Jews stand alone. No overlap with Moroccan Arabs. No proximity to Berber tribes. No blending with the land they lived on. They remain separate, genetically sealed. A community within a country, but not of it. Their genome is both armor and isolation. A language their bodies speak, even when their mouths fall silent. But that's where the real question begins. Because while their genes resist local connection, they whisper of another link. One deeper than flags or faith. So we have to ask, are Moroccan Jews closer to each other? Or to the Arab neighbors history taught them to fear? If you lined up a Moroccan Jew beside a Moroccan Berber or Arab, you'd expect their DNA to echo the same soil, the same sun. But the map doesn't lie. When geneticists traced the ancestry, it didn't lead to the Sahara or the streets of Casablanca. It led to Jerusalem, to the valleys of the Levant, to dusty hills that now sit at the heart of a conflict, but once held a single people. In the data, Moroccan Jews don't stand beside their Moroccan neighbors. They cluster with Mizrahim, with Sephardim, with Jews from Iraq, from Syria, from the old Sephardic ports of the Mediterranean. And then it gets stranger, because just outside that cluster, the closest non-Jewish relatives aren't Moroccans at all. They're Palestinians, Druze, Bedouins, the very people so often seen across a border, across a line of tension, across decades of fear. Genetically, they are cousins, not in theory, in strands of DNA, not in sentiment, in code shared, ancient, stubborn. It challenges everything we think we know about enemies, about us and them, about who we're meant to be and who we're told we're not. Because here's a people who lived in Morocco for 1,000 years, but whose genome never really unpacked its bags. A people whose closest relatives live in towns they've never visited, behind narratives they've never questioned. And so we're left asking the question that shatters geography and bends identity. What does it mean to be Moroccan? If your genes are not, we're taught to search for origins. One root, one beginning, one story to explain who we are. But Moroccan Jewish DNA refuses that simplicity. Because when scientists split the genome by sex, something unexpected emerged. The men, their Y chromosomes, told one story. Straight, clean, Middle Eastern. Fathers tracing back to ancient priests, to the Levant, to a temple now long gone. But the women told many. Their mitochondrial DNA was scattered, Southern Europe, West Eurasia, threads too faint to name. Not a single founding mother. Not 4. Not even 10. Each woman was her own arrival, her own exile, her own beginning. And this split, this dual identity, isn't an accident. It's history, coded in biology. Because Jewish tradition passed lineage through the father, faith through the mother, and marriage within the walls of the community. Endogamy kept the male line pure. Cultural norms shaped who could enter and who could stay. That's why the genome looks like this. A lock gate on one side, a patchwork quilt on the other. And while Ashkenazi Jews show tight founder effects for mothers, a narrow genetic neck, Moroccan Jews remained open, complex. A community that survived through change, not stasis. Their identity wasn't built from one tree. It was woven like a net. Threads from Babylon, from Andalusia, from forgotten ports and unnamed women, held together not by blood alone, but by memory, by law, by choice. But that raises a question. If identity was built by exile, layer after layer, migration after migration, then what happens? When the exile ends, if exile built identity, can identity survive return? It's tempting to look for one thread, one clean line from past to present. But Moroccan Jewish DNA doesn't work like that. It's not a thread. It's a tapestry, tangled, textured, stitched by hands we'll never name. Each strand tells a different part of the journey. There's fire from Iberia, the panic of exile, families pushed from Spain in the night, clutching scrolls and silence. There are roots from Babylon, deep, ancient, unbending, priests and prophets encoded in the Y chromosome. And in the corners, softer threads, Berber whispers, rare, almost lost, flickering in the mitochondrial shadows like embers of an older fire. The beauty isn't in the purity. It's in the survival. Because the world tried to divide. By faith, by flag, by language. Tried to pull the tapestry apart, thread by thread. But DNA doesn't obey borders. It remembers. It remembers the mothers who crossed oceans, the fathers who guarded prayers in exile, the children born between languages, carrying memories they didn't understand. That's the power of a genome like this, not to simplify, but to reveal the chaos that made us. And maybe that's what identity really is. Not a straight path, but a quilt, made of contradiction, bound by exile, sewn by choice. And maybe, just maybe, we don't carry the past. Maybe the past carries us. If the echoes of lost ancestry and ancient migrations move you, subscribe. Because the next untold story is already waiting.